This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Laddick. Mohit Mukherjee is an educator, entrepreneur, and an avid player in the field of social entrepreneurship. In 2006, he founded the Center for Executive Education at the United Nations mandated University for Peace, which he still directs. In his role with UPEACE, he's developed and taught over 40 seminars in 7 countries on themes ranging from educating in changing times to social entrepreneurship. Mohit is also the founder of Changemakers International, which focuses on youth and social innovation. Prior to the center, Mohit served as Education Program Manager of the Earth Charter Initiative, an international nonprofit organization, and he also spent 4 years at A.T. Kearney. Mohit has his bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from Stanford University, and he did his master's at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I spoke with Mohit in Florida. Hi there, Mohit. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
Thanks, Stephen, for the invite. Really excited to be here.
And where am I calling you today?
So I'm in West Palm Beach, Florida.
Okay, great. I caught you in the States. I know that you do a lot of traveling. Tell me about what it is that you are doing right now at the Center for Executive Education.
Yes, so I started up the Center for Executive Education 8 years ago, which seems to me at least to be an awfully long time ago. And so I must say my role has evolved during this period. And right now, I'm in charge of the center, but frankly, a lot of the day-to-day operations now are being conducted by team members who are in Costa Rica. And so I really think of myself as keeping the space of higher education, of executive education is moving fast. So what I've been able to do, I'd say in the past 6 to 9 months, is really to think at a higher level about how that space is changing and to analyze some of the services that we're currently offering and how those need to evolve to still be relevant in a very fast moving space of executive ed.
Okay, so I know that the center focuses on social entrepreneurship, developing innovative leaders. How did you come to that focus? What was the genesis for that?
Great question, because the first course that was offered through the Center for Executive Education was called Nonprofit Leadership. And that was really my best guess as to what would be a good sweet spot in terms of the brand of the University for Peace and the Center for Executive Education, and also what I felt that there would be a real need for in our target audience, which were nonprofit leaders, and that workshop had some very practical skills building modules around how to write a fundraising proposal. We go through a database like the Foundation Center and get a sense of how many foundations are out there and how we can sort it. So just to give you an example of my initial courses were skills based, but even in that initial course, we had a self-reflective session about what's your leadership style, or how do you react in conflict. And over the first couple of years, I realized that what participants really walked away excited about were those spaces where they could reflect on their strengths, on their challenges, and really that what I call a leadership piece became the part that was most transformative for the participants. And some of the skills building things were useful, valuable, but I felt that those perhaps they could have gotten that in a different context. And so I would say the evolution of the center's courses has been more focusing on this idea of how do participants use that typically week-long course to really have space to reflect on what they're doing, their practices, what they'd like to do better, some of the conversations that they have with other participants, and creating spaces for really asking good questions around which people can at a peer-to-peer level discuss some of the challenges they're facing. That's been some of the evolution of I would say the content. And in terms of the focus on social innovation, one of the pieces that the participants have found most valuable is to actually walk away with a plan of action. So something that they've had a chance to develop during that period together, but that they're committed to implement post the course. And so one of our capstone courses, and certainly in our diploma in social innovation, is this idea of developing a business plan.
I wanted to touch back on the fact that people felt like they were receiving real value with this space to reflect. I know that the center offers courses both in Costa Rica as well as online. Have you found a difference in people's ability to reflect? Is that really, is it more enhanced when there's human interaction, sort of real time, or have you been able to also bridge that gap into the digital world as well?
So I'm going to admit something that I don't always readily admit, but I do feel that the online space, so basically offering a purely virtual course, has some limitations on exactly that, the ability for people to really get energized around conversations, right? Because there's something to be said about being in a room with other people who are peers, who are perhaps doing, in a slightly different context, but all together for the same purposes of going back and being more effective in either their organizations or more effective in their personal leadership styles. So I think that energy is somewhat missing in a virtual space. And so we're doing two things. One is the online courses do tend to still be more skills-based. Though there is one, I think, notable exception. We have a course called Designing Your Life, Innovating from the Inside Out. And that's really an online course that's specifically looking at well-being, work-life balance, and applying positive psychology to really one's own personal journey. And there, what we've done as a result of some of the limitations I talked about in a virtual course is we have people actually connecting with each other over a Skype call to kind of generate some of that collaboration, some of that energy. Our ideal model for participants who take an online course is somehow to also encourage them to physically take a course with us in Costa Rica, which sometimes they do, so that would be kind of a hybrid format. So they also have an experience of coming in and having a face-to-face course with us. The second thing that we're working on is kind of being able to set up where there are enough alumni in certain geographies where they can actually physically meet with other alumni or other participants of the course. So I would say, to summarize where I stand right now in the online space, is if it's purely an online space, we are finding that some very tangible skills seem to work better in a purely virtual space.
You've mentioned it a couple of times. I didn't properly introduce it myself, but the center is located at the United Nations mandated University for Peace in Costa Rica. Tell me about that journey. How did you end up there? Was it a conscious choice to choose Costa Rica and UPEACE? But take us back to where you started and how you became an educator for the social innovation space.
I'll try and make a long story short, but I started off working as a management consultant for a big consulting firm based in San Francisco, and I'd been doing that for 3 years and realized that this was not something that I wanted to pursue long term. In fact, even within the consulting firm, the times when I felt most engaged was when I was involved with mentoring or coaching other people, new consultants. And so, I had thought about this earlier in my life, that the field of education would be one that I felt I'd really enjoy. So I took that leap of faith when I was 25 and actually taught high school for 2 years. And having studied engineering as an undergrad, I was qualified to teach physics and science because I didn't really have a teaching credential, but that was something that high schools seemed to need at the time. And being a high school physics teacher, I realized that while there were certainly spaces for interacting with influential, with youth who were at an influential stage in their life. I was working with 16 to 18-year-olds. I felt that I was really quite limited by this curriculum. And I realized that my intention to be an educator wasn't necessarily to teach physics at a level that people can just kind of pass that requirement, but it was to be able to have conversations around things like things that I thought were more important, which to me related to what do you want to do with your life, how do you want to make impact, what are your strengths. And so after teaching physics for 2 years, I realized that the topics that I wanted to engage, that I wanted to kind of bring into the classroom or into education were ones that I didn't feel like I knew how I would do that. I felt that I definitely needed to go back and get a degree in education and think about from curriculum development to the politics of education. So I did exactly that. I went to grad school, and then post grad school, the job that I got, it was coincidental that it was in Costa Rica, but I worked for an organization called the Earth Charter Initiative, a wonderful framework that has come up with values and principles for a more just, sustainable, equitable world. And I thought, wow, this organization has a vision very much around the ideals that appeal to me, and if they are launching an education program, which they were at the time, I would love to think about how these principles can translate into curriculum. And so I did that for 3 years. And that organization, the Earth Charter, happened to be headquartered in Costa Rica. So that's what brought me to Costa Rica. And again, coincidentally, the Earth Charter had space. Their headquarters was at the University for Peace. And so, what those 3 years allowed me to do a couple of things. It did allow me to really work with content development, curriculum development. On the other side, I was also interacting with educators who were trying to teach around these principles of social justice. And I got a sense that, wow, this is an exciting space. I'm very glad I'm in this space. And 3 years into it, I realized that I wanted to be more than a facilitator between educators who are actually, student facing and delivering this, and myself, who was, I was kind of a bridge in the sense that I was developing a website where curriculum resources were stored, where lessons learned were shared, where I'd organize a conference every year where these educators could get together and share stories. So I was kind of in an administrative role. And I realized that I was now ready to actually do what I had hoped to do when I was 25, which was actually be working with students and participants around these issues of how do we make a better world, kind of thing, to put it in very simple terms. So at that point, I approached the University for Peace and I said, I'd love to join your team. And they were happy to bring me on. They knew me through this relationship that I already had because I was on their campus through a different organization. So at that point, I had a dual role with the university. They brought me on as a faculty for half my time, and the other half is where I proposed to them that they should start and launch a Center for Executive Education that would allow people to engage with the university without having to commit to a 1-year master's program, but they could come in for a workshop. So that's, I thought I'd keep that story shorter. Became a long story after all.
Not at all.
Yeah.
What I find interesting is your story is purposeful, but it also has those moments of serendipity that we hear with so many people about, I kind of know where I was going, but then, something happened or, an opportunity opened up and you followed it, rather than sort of, I knew this was where I was going and I sort of hit my target.
Very much so. Yeah.
Tell me about, as the center has evolved, I know that you have built a tremendous community around the courses that you've given, around the courses that you've taught. And that community includes a lot of people that we would characterize as aidpreneurs. Social entrepreneurs, social innovators, people who work for nonprofits, people who work in the development world. Do you have any either individuals or organizations that sort of stand out in your mind who you either had in a class or a course that you've kept in touch with and you said, hey, they really went and they're doing something great?
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so characteristics, I would say that people who go out and launch, I was going to say launch a social enterprise, but it's even broader than that, is pursue something that they are committed to doing, but that involves some level of risk and is different from what they have been doing, right? So just made something happen that they hadn't yet before taking the course. I think those people, I don't give myself a lot of credit for giving them the idea, or it's much more about being a catalyst. So when I think about the people who've gone out, taken a course on social entrepreneurship, for example, and launched their organization, I think they really needed that last push where they felt validated in terms of a community that's supportive. They had the space and structure to really think about, yes, how much do they need to get off the ground? What may be some venues to either fundraise or how to get over that threshold of launching their initiative. And I think one thing that the course tends to do through sharing of case studies, I usually bring in guest speakers who talk about their own experiences, and I think there's certainly an explicit agenda of trying to inspire participants, right? That if others can do it and have done it, why can't I, kind of thing, and I will. So I would say that's been where that the courses have been very helpful to those people who just needed that extra energy, the push. And let me tell you the story of Andreas. He started an organization called Revolve. That's based out of his office is in San Francisco. It's based out of it's in California, and what they're doing is it's a model for crowdsourcing. It's a complicated business model, but the idea is to install solar panels, solar energy systems in community spaces. There's quite a lot of upfront investment that's required. And his organization has not only created the delivery system for let's say if a school wants to generate their electricity through these renewable solar sources, but that initial investment, he's created a mechanism where it can be crowd funded. And so, because that became a big threshold for these community spaces to go forward. It wasn't so much the desire to go and invest in clean energy, but more the ability to do so. So I thought that was a very innovative organization. It's I see it in the news quite a lot. He started off with a one-person shared office space in San Francisco, and the last time I'd connected with him, he had finally started paying himself a salary, brought somebody else on board, and had won a grant from a local foundation. And with Andres, he first took a course called Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Social Change. And that allowed him to really work on his business plan and his concept. And interestingly, he came back, even after his organization was launched and off the ground, he came back and took the course called Designing Your Life, because he was feeling extremely stretched between being the sole founder of a social enterprise and balancing other things in his life that he thought were important.
It's kind of a classic entrepreneur right there, I would assume.
That's right, yeah. So so what we've been doing is connecting almost every quarter, because one of his takeaways after the Designing Your Life course, which he had a great experience in the course, and he thought, what's a way that I can continue to hold myself accountable for these things that I know are important in my life but tend to slip because of work. And I said, Andreas, how about we connect every 3 months because I know somebody else who has a similar issue. So the two of us connect and kind of do this peer-to-peer check-in to make sure that we're actually staying true to what we believe is important.
And does he approach you as a true peer, or does he look to you as a mentor, and do you have those kinds of relationships?
Yeah, so it's evolved. It evolved very quickly. I think our first couple of calls, I felt he was still looking at me as, his professor from UPEACE. But, as he started getting, maybe it was a shift in my mind, but as I saw that his organization was being covered by the New York Times and got this big foundation grant, soon I felt that I was asking Andres for tips on so how do you get that kind of peer coverage? So in my mind, I had a lot more to learn from his success in his organization. So yeah, that's one story. Another one that came to me that I haven't been that close to, because she took one of those initial nonprofit leadership courses, a young Mexican woman. She must have been 23, 24 at the time, and I could tell she was really passionate about this issue. It was undocumented Mexican workers who, because they didn't have papers, they didn't have any kind of papers, from a birth certificate to any kind of identification, they just weren't able to access even the basic infrastructure, social services in her community, from public schooling to healthcare. And so in that week that she spent in Costa Rica, she put together her plan for launching this organization. And then she reconnected with me maybe 2 years after that course. And literally, when she reconnected, it was this letter of gratitude with these links to, she'd been covered by Mexican TV and the press, and her organization had gained quite a lot of traction. So again, somebody who, like I said, I just see that she would have made it happen, needed that extra push. And even though I was very touched by her letter, I felt that really it's her own work that made it possible. But amazing to see how in a couple of years she'd gone from what felt like a fairly unstructured idea when I first met her to really having gotten traction to a problem that I think is huge. So that's I think a couple of stories that I thought I'd share.
You've got to be, what a great position that you're in, as students come through. You get to hear this feedback about success. You probably hear enough about failure as well, or the trials and tribulations, but what a great feedback loop for you to be able to be a part of. Speaking of which, where do your students come from? You're based in Costa Rica, not so easy for anyone to get to unless you're Costa Rican. Where are people coming from?
I'm going to just kind of distinguish between the two audiences that I often deliver courses to. So one audience comes directly through the University for Peace. These are master's students at the university, and I'm teaching a course on social entrepreneurship through one of their master's programs. And these students literally come from all around the world. So the last time I had a classroom of 18 students, we had 14 countries represented. I had a student from Myanmar. I had a student from, usually we have a couple of Koreans, a couple of Japanese, because the University for Peace has there's an outside organization that has some scholarships for students from Asian countries. But it really tends to be a very, very diverse group, partly because of the mission of the University for Peace, and the fact that these are longer one-year programs means that, for example, a student from Myanmar can go through all the paperwork to get the visa to show up at the university. Now, the courses that I run through the Center for Executive Education, which I founded, those tend to be shorter courses, and therefore we don't get as much of a mix. It's much harder for a student from, let's say, Bangladesh or Myanmar to come to Costa Rica for a 1-week course because of the travel costs and the visa process. So there we still get a real mix of nationalities. So typically we'd get, in a group of 12 people, we'd get 6 nationalities. We almost always have a few participants from North America, so Canada and the US. And then we usually have at least 2 or 3 Costa Ricans. And then we have, similar to yourself, Stephen, we have expats based in Costa Rica who often join us for these professional development courses, because these courses are in English. The University for Peace does tend to attract this kind of international community. And so that tends to be the mix for the professional development courses, maybe a third from North America, a third Costa Rica based, and a third kind of rest of the world.
How, you are an ambassador from the world, right? You are, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're born in India, you grew up in Geneva, you were educated in the U.S. For higher education. How has that influenced your perception of people's ability to make change in the world? Has that contributed to your belief in that, or has that given you some sort of unique perspective you find in being able to communicate across these cultures and be able to communicate across these different individuals and help them to find that inspiration to start social change?
Yeah, I mean, I think I haven't thought explicitly about that question, but I tend to gravitate to. So let me just back up one step. So when I develop the curriculum for a course, because my frame of reference, I've lived in these different places, and it does also, more than living in these different places, I definitely feel like it's a small interconnected world. For example, my parents live in New Delhi. I'm living in Florida right now. I work in Costa Rica. My best friend is Swiss. So it definitely is more than an intellectual recognition. It's just the way I live my life. Feels like it's a small interconnected world, and so therefore the readings I choose, the cases I pick, the conversations that I structure tend to have that assumption behind them, right? Which is, these are some shared issues that we face as a human family, and what's something that's a big one for you, and what do you want to do about it? And so, the practical part of it means so I had a student from, he was in Chicago going to a public high school. This is a recent course that I ran for youth, actually. They were between 16 and 19. So this student, Andre, he's African American, and his issue was how do we create a more racially integrated school environment, right? He's a very high achieving student, and he found himself in these courses, these advanced placement courses, where he was the only African American in the course. Meanwhile, the student population in his school is about 50-50 in terms of white versus other racial backgrounds. So, it really caused him to think about, why is this happening, that the highest achieving students are primarily white? But what I just want to say is that I thought this was a great issue for him to pick up on. His own feedback to me at the end of the course was that, I've realized that this issue that I'm thinking about actually connects to a lot of other issues that people are facing in different ways in different parts of the world. And again, it wasn't something that I expected him to say, but I guess through the conversations we had, and the fact that the group itself that came together, again, represented about 6 or 7 different nationalities, he realized that whatever he was thinking about, in his case, race relationships in his school and community, he wanted it to connect to something that could also have implications at an international level. So the answer to your original question is, Stephen, I think it does affect everything that I do. And the idea of the fact that we are all interconnected is something that is a very strong message in the courses that I'm involved in.
Speaking of that evolution, where is that evolution going? What's next for you as you look to the next maybe 5 years or maybe the next 10 years of where you're taking your career as an educator in the social innovation space. And I'll prompt you by saying I know that you've recently finished a book that's coming out for youth in entrepreneurship. Are there projects like that? Are there other things that you're looking forward to developing that you think are going to have impact in this space?
Yeah, no, thanks so much for that question. Because what's really alive for me right now is this idea that we shouldn't wait till an MBA program or grad school to introduce the idea that you can be a change maker or a social innovator, and also help students develop the skills to do that when they typically, if you're in your 20s, so the students I get at the University for Peace, when they're taking their master's programs, they're in their mid-20s. Most of them have taken on some kind of loan to finance their master's program. And frankly, that does reduce their ability to kind of bootstrap and start a social enterprise without any income. It just lowers their threshold for risk, I think. Most of them have already had jobs before. Many of them have an open invitation after their master's program to come back to their job. So that was part of what struck me after doing this for nearly a decade, is that, these concepts of both the process of writing a business plan, thinking about starting a social enterprise, but also the mindset of being a change maker, taking risk, being okay with failure, seeing well-being and happiness as something that's not a personal journey, but that also is integrated with having an impact on society. All those concepts, I feel there's no reason we should not expose younger students to those ideas. So when I reflect back on my time as a physics teacher, I think my time could have been much better served if I had the content and the space to teach a course on social entrepreneurship. So that's, it's been 15 years since I left corporate America to work as a physics teacher, but I'm finally at a place where if a high school said to me, Mohit, we want to hire you now to teach social entrepreneurship, I have it. If the high school hired me to reorient all their curriculum so that students graduate thinking of themselves as change makers, I would have a lot of pieces of that. And so that's really what I'm working on right now. So I have, with the help of a really great book coach, put together this book, and I'm going to call it a handbook called How to Be a Social Entrepreneur Before You're 20. And so that's got some of the curriculum elements of doing that, of putting together a business plan, of thinking of everything from the legal structure to how you would build your team. But I think there's a bigger play there, which is connecting with I want to say policymakers in education, even though that's a little scary to me how politics and education come together. But if I could also begin to have a voice in that space on reorienting curriculum so that these notions of making positive impact can be embedded in a high school curriculum, that would be very, very satisfying for me 10 years from now to look back and say, yeah, I was one of the players in helping that to happen.
What, as someone who's founded an organization focused on education, but working in this space, as someone who operates as an independent professional, and your careers continue to evolve, are there tools or particular technologies or systems that you rely upon that you think might be effective for other people to generate success, either as an organization or as an individual?
The answer to that is not really. No, I think the tools and the techniques change and evolve. And, let me give you an example. So at some point, I was working with a small team for the center, and we felt that sharing of documents was essential for us to be able to be effective. And, we started with Dropbox and then moved to Google Drive and experienced some problems with that too. So I think the tools and techniques change, but maybe what I would say, if I had to reflect back on what's allowed me to continue to evolve and feel excited about what I do, and therefore also I think that relates to some level of getting traction on what I want to do, is creating those spaces for myself also to be able to do those. I would call them. I heard this concept. Like a personal retreat is what I heard somebody call it. But I've done some of those. Sometimes ad hoc on long flights where literally it's a 8 to 10 hour flight, and I find that at the end of the flight I've written just handwritten in a blank notebook that I carry along with me, several pages of what's in my head, so there's part of it is looking back and projecting forward. And so I think those spaces have allowed me to check in and not continue doing something that is not the right fit anymore.
Last question. So you have a unique position as an educator of interacting with people who are, seeking to grow their careers or, make change in their own life or just gain knowledge. But is there been any, critical advice that you would give to someone who's interested in becoming a social innovator or starting a social enterprise or getting into the development and humanitarian aid world that you have found consistently? You've given that consistently over the last, 10 years?
Yeah, and I'm hesitating here because so part of that advice, is the way is everything I do in the course. So that message starts from day one, and we end again kind of reiterating that message. So the message is it's one that's probably not it won't sound so original, and so therefore that message has to be brought alive through stories, through examples, through processes that have people really go through reflecting on what their strengths are, what they're passionate about. But that message, I think when I get a student coming back to me at the end of the course saying, okay, I have a dilemma, it's between this and this, often one is more of a safer option where maybe the head tells them that this might make sense, at least in the short term. And the other option is more one where there's it's at an emotional level, it feels better, but there's more of a risk associated with it. So I think I don't think it's as easy to move something from where it's a good fit in the head and the numbers work, but it doesn't feel right at a cultural level, or it doesn't feel right for who that person is. So I think that's a harder one to shift that. Let's say it's a job offer and make it work. Versus I'd always encourage people to go the other route, where it's something that feels right, where you feel it's either your life purpose, or it's a culture that really works well for you, or it's a place where you can flourish, and maybe then work on the other piece. What are your other needs that may not be getting met in this environment, or what are the risks that you're worried about, and how can we mitigate those risks? So I'm a big believer in this alignment of kind of head and heart. But the advice that I give people when I see that those both pieces are not lining up is don't do it if it's not feeling right in the heart, or it's not feeling right at a gut level, because that's the kind of thing that I think can lead to a couple of things. One is I think in a worst case scenario where it's such a safe environment. I've met people, unfortunately here, I'm just going to say it, but I've met a handful of people who've worked at UN organizations and who felt that after working there for a couple of decades, they regretted not having exited earlier. And I feel like it's probably quite specific in each case, specific situations, but the common thread there wasn't enough sense of I'm making impact, right? It was being part of a big bureaucracy. Again, the UN might be a great fit depending on what you're doing and where you are. So these handful of people, the reason they had this regret is because they felt that they weren't able to move the scoreboard or the pointer enough in a couple of decades. And so that level of spending 20 years in an organization where you feel like you could have had more impact in other environment, that to me makes me feel sad. I mean, there's not much, I think, at that point I kind of listen, try and be empathetic, but I think the other situation could be where doing something where it's not such a good fit, and a couple of years later you realize it's not such a good fit and you try something else. That I think is fine, and that I would call it, like the failing fast model, where maybe you didn't go with your gut feel. And I really feel that's what happened to me when I went into management consulting. I didn't feel like it was a good fit for who I was. And 3 years later, when I left it, I felt like I had learned a lot about myself. And so I don't regret having done 3 years in an environment where it wasn't the best fit for me. But I wouldn't extend that too long, because there's obviously missed opportunities on things that could be a better fit. So my advice to students would be to really to try and find that sweet spot. And I think we're in an environment where one can shape one's future much more than I feel 20, 30 years ago when let's say, when I think about both my dad and my granddad's careers, they worked both for one organization throughout their lives. I feel we're in an environment now where people have much more say in designing at least their professional lives. Certainly their personal lives, but even their professional lives, they have much more say in crafting it. So why compromise? Why sell oneself short? Why get into a situation where one feels that one's not going to be performing at one's best? And that's the advice I give people. Stephen, can I take a second just to reflect back on the other question? You had asked about tools, processes, and techniques, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I find doing any of the kind of strength survey feedback to be quite a valuable process. So something that the one that I did recently, it's free, it's online. It's called the VIA Strengths Survey. So VIA Strengths Survey. If you Google that, it's 240 questions developed by Martin Seligman. And in real time, it'll give you some feedback on your strengths. Strengths Finder is another one that. So I think in terms of practical tools, I was talking about reflection. A tool like that can give you some feedback that you can go and reflect on.
Mohit, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Stephen. Really appreciate the questions and this time also for me to reflect.
You've been listening to Terms of Reference, a weekly podcast from aidpreneur.com. Find us on iTunes or at www.aidpreneur.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.